Well, come back to my channel, Be Masculine. Asterisk women don't pick fights because they're angry. They pick fights because they're reactive to the emotional intensity that conflict creates. That moment when she starts an argument over something trivial. When she escalates minor disagreements into major confrontations. When she seems determined to create a drama where none existed. She's not trying to solve problems. She's trying to generate the emotional stimulation that her psychology requires to feel connected and engaged. This isn't happening because she's irrational or difficult. It's happening because of fundamental differences in how male and female nervous systems process emotional language and relationship security. Men seek emotional equilibrium. Women seek emotional intensity. Men want to solve problems and return to peace. Women want to create emotional experiences that make them feel alleviated, connected. This biological difference explains why your attempts to avoid conflict often trigger more conflict. And why your logical solutions to her emotional problems make her more frustrated rather than less. But what's truly disturbing about this dynamic? Women have learned to use conflict as a drug to regulate their emotional states and manipulate male behavior. The fight isn't the goal. The emotional intensity and your emotional reaction are the goals. To understand why women choose conflict, you must first understand that female psychology is fundamentally different from male psychology in how it processes. Emotional stimulation. Women require emotional intensity to feel engaged and connected in ways that men simply don't understand. Throughout evolution of history, women survived depended on maintaining emotional connections with men who could provide protection and resources. The women who could successfully engage male attention emotional investment, even through negative emotions, were more likely to serve and reproduce than those who were ignored. This created psychological program that makes women crave emotional intensity over emotional stability, peace, and harmony. While pleasant, don't create the neurochemical responses that women's brains interpret as connection and engagement. Conflict, drama, and emotional turbulence trigger biochemical rewards that female psychology craves. The modern woman living in emotional comfort experiences this as psychological understimulation. Her nervous system, designed for emotional intensity and social drama, becomes restless and agitated when life folds to peaceful. She begins unconsciously create the emotional stimulation her psychology requires. This is why women often seem happy during periods of relationships or bends, and most dissatisfied during periods of relationship stability. The stability that men work to create doesn't satisfy female psychological needs for emotional intensity and connection through conflict. The emotional addiction operates below conscious awareness for most women. They didn't consciously decide to create a drama. They simply feel compelled to engage in behaviors that generate the emotional intensity their psychology craves. The fight becomes a means of emotional regulation rather than genuine problem solving. Women have discovered that conflict is the most reliable way to capture and maintain male attention in a world where men are increasingly mentally unavailable and distracted. When normal conversation fails to engage you, when pleasant interaction doesn't generate the focus she craves, conflict becomes the nuclear option for obtaining your complete attention. Think about how your behavior changes when she starts a fight. Suddenly, you're completely focused on her. Your phone gets put down. Your other concerns become secondary, and she has your undivided attention in ways that pleasant conversation never achieves. From her perspective, conflict works where other methods fail. This creates a psychological conditioning pattern where women learn that creating problems generates more male attention than solving problems or being agreeable. The woman who's pleasant and easy to deal with often gets taken for granted. Will the woman who creates drama receives intense focus and emotional investment? The attention economy operates on the principle that negative attention is better than no attention. Women would rather have you angry and engaged than peaceful and distracted. Your anger proves that you care enough to respond emotionally, while your indifference suggests that she's not important and not affects your emotional state. This is we attempts to ignore her conflicts or withdraw from her arguments often escalate rather than de-escalate the situation. Your emotional withdrawal tricks her fear of abandonment and increases her need to re-engage your attention through more intense conflict. The modern woman competing for attention against work, entertainment, social media, and countless other distractions has learned that conflict cuts through all other priorities and forces you to focus exclusively on her. The fight becomes a tool for attention management rather than genuine communication. Women, use conflict to test the strength of your emotional investment in the relationship. The logic is primitive, but effective. If you still get angry when she provokes you, it proves you still care. If you remain calm and attached, it suggests you're emotionally checking out of the relationship. This testing mechanism operates on the biological principle that emotional intensity indicates investment. Through tout evolutionary history, men who are genuinely committed to women responded emotionally to threats to the relationship, while men who were preparing to leave became emotionally detached and indifferent. Women's psychology interprets your emotional reactions as indicators of relationship security. Your anger, frustration, and attempts to resolve conflicts signal you're still invested in maintaining the relationship. Your calm detachment triggers anxiety that you're emotionally preparing to leave. Their assurance mechanism explains why women often seem more relaxed and affectional after successful fights. Your emotional engagement during conflict has reassured her that you're still psychologically kit to the relationship, allowing your anxiety to subside. This creates the maddening dynamic where she seems happiest after making you miserable. Your anger has served its purpose of proving your continued investment, allowing her to return to baseline emotional comfort while you're still processing the stress of the conflict. But here's where it gets really dark. The reassurance mechanism becomes addictive because it provides temporarily from chronic relationship anxiety. Instead of building genuine security through consistent positive interactions, she develops a pattern of creating insecurity through conflict, then feeling relief when your emotional reactions prove your investment. Women have learned that emotional conflicts are incredibly effective tools for controlling male behavior. When you react emotionally to her provocations, you're essentially giving her control over your emotional state and decision-making process. The control dynamic works because men are reconditioned to prioritize women's emotional comfort over their own psychological well-being. When she creates emotional drama, you feel responsible for resolving it, even when you didn't create the problem. This gives her enormous power to redirect your attention and energy toward her priorities. Emotional manipulation through conflict allows women to interrupt your activities, change your plans, and focus your attention on their concerns whenever they choose. The fight becomes a remote control for your behavior that can activate at will. This control extends beyond immediate situations to long-term behavioral modification. Men who consistently respond to emotional conflicts by changing their behavior teach women that drama is an effective way to get what they want. The woman learns that creating problems generates solutions that favor her preferences. The control dynamic also serves to maintain psychological dynamism in the relationship. The person who can control when conflicts occur, how they escalate, and when they're solved essentially controls the entire emotional climate of the relationship. Women use this control to train men to be more emotionally available, more accommodating to their needs, and more responsive to their emotional states. Each successful manipulation through conflict reinforces the pattern and makes future emotional control more likely. Understanding why women choose conflict requires recognizing fundamental differences in how male and female nervous systems respond to stress and emotional intensity. These biological differences explain why conflict affects men and women so differently. Men's stress response systems are designed for acute physical challenges that require focused problem-solving and rapid resolution. When men encounter conflict, their biology activates fight-or-flight responses aimed at quickly resolving the threat and returning to baseline calm. Women's stress response systems are designed for social and emotional challenges that require sustained engagement and relationship management. When women encounter conflict, their biology activates tendon befriend response, aimed at increasing connection and emotional processing. This means that conflict creates stress for men while creating stimulation for women. The same argument that exhausts and frustrates you energizes and engages her. What you experience as draining emotional labor, she experiences as invigorating emotional connection. The biological difference explains why men want to solve conflicts quickly and move on, while women want to process conflicts theologically and extract maximum emotional meaning from them. You're trying to end stress. She's trying to extend the stimulation. Women's nervous systems are so more sensitive to emotional nuance and better equipped for sustained emotional processing. What seems like overwhelming drama to you might feel like normal emotional intensity to her. Your threshold for emotional overload is lower than hers. These differences mean that behaviors that seem irrational from male perspectives make perfect sense from female perspectives. She's not trying to torture you with endless emotional processing. She's engaging with conflict in ways that her biology finds natural and satisfying. Women live in emotionally stable relationships to develop what can only be described as peace. Fatigue, the calm, predictable event that men work to create, becomes psychologically understimulate for women, who require emotional intensity to feel fully alive and engaged. Boredom in relationships streaks women's unconscious desire to create emotional stimulation through conflict. The peaceful relationship begins to feel emotionally dead to her, prompting behaviors designed to inject drama and intensity back into the dynamic. This explains why many relationships experience conflict cycles that seem to emerge without external triggers, when things are going too well for too long. Women's psychology begins to crave the emotional intensity that conflict provides. The boredom factor also explains why women often seem to sabotage happy periods in relationships, just when everything seems perfect. She finds reasons to be upset, problems to address, or issues to resolve. That perfection itself becomes the problem because it lacks emotional stimulation. Women's need for emotional variety and intensity conflicts with men's preference for emotional consistency and peace. What you experience as relationship success, sustained harmony and stability. She experiences as relationship stagnation and emotional death. The boredom factor reveals why simply being a good partner isn't enough to maintain female satisfaction. You can kind, responsible, attentive, and supportive while still failing to provide the emotional intensity that women's psychology requires. Understanding this dynamic helps explain why nice guys often struggle in relationships despite doing everything right. They provide emotional comfort, but not emotional excitement, stability, but not stimulation, peace, but not passion. Women use conflict to validate their importance in your life and confirm that they have the power to affect your emotional state. The ability to make you angry, frustrated, or upset proves that she matters enough to you to generate strong emotional reactions. The validation mechanism operates on the principle that emotional impact equals personal importance. If she can't affect your emotions, it suggests that she doesn't matter enough to you to generate feelings either positive or negative. This is why women often escalate conflicts when you try to remain calm and rational. Your emotional detachment triggers her fear that she's not important enough to you to warrant emotional investment. She needs evidence that she can move you emotionally to feel secure in her significance to you. The validation through conflict. Explains why women often seem satisfied after successful arguments, even when nothing was actually resolved. The goal wasn't problem resolution. It was confirmation that she has the power to affect your emotional state. This dynamic also explains why logical responses to emotional conflicts often make situations worse rather than better. When you respond rationally to her emotional provocations, you're failing to provide the emotional validation that was the actual purpose of the conflict. Women interpret your calm, logical responses as evidence that she doesn't matter enough to you to generate emotional reactions. This triggers more intense provocations as she attempts to find the level of stimulation that will finally produce the emotional response. How validates her importance. Conflict serves as a mechanism for establishing and maintaining emotional hierarchy within relationships. The person who controls when fights occur, how they unfold, and when they end essentially controls the relationship's emotional framework. Women use conflict initiation as a way to establish that their emotional needs take priority over your preferences for peace and stability, successfully drawing you into arguments proves that her emotional states matter more than your desire to avoid. Drama. The power struggle operates through emotional manipulation that forces you to choose between maintaining your boundaries and maintaining relationship harmony. When you consistently choose harmony, you're essentially surrendering emotion control to her. This creates a relationship dynamic where she determines the emotional climate while you react to her emotional leadership. You become responsible for managing emotion. She creates while she remains free to generate new emotional lenses whenever she chooses. That war struggle also establishes precedents for future conflict resolution. If she successfully uses emotional drama to get her way, she learns that this strategy works and will continue using it to achieve her goals. Women who win these power struggles through emotional manipulation develop increasing confidence in their ability to control relationship dynamics through conflict. This often leads to escalating demons and more frequent emotional testing. Conflict generates neurocalic responses in women's brains that create genuine biochemical addiction to emotional intensity. The stress hormones, adrenaline, and emotional neurotransmitters released during arguments create chemical rewards that women's psychology craves. The biochemical reward system explains why women often seem energized rather than drained after conflicts, while you're experiencing the exhausting aftereffects of stress hormones. She's experiencing the rewarding aftereffects of emotional intensity and neurotransmitter release. This biochemical addiction means that women develop tolerance to emotional intensity and require increasingly dramatic conflicts to achieve the same level of neurochemical satisfaction. What used to create sufficient communion becomes inadequate, requiring escalation to achieve the desired biochemical response. The Deco model explains why rational discussions about reducing conflict often fail. You're essentially asking her to give up a biochemical reward system that her brain has learned to crave. From her nervous system's perspective, conflict isn't a problem to be solved, it's a need to be satisfied. Women who become addicted to conflict by orchestry often struggle in peaceful relationships because they don't receive neurochemical rewards. Their brain shave learned to expect peace becomes punishment, while drama becomes reward. Understanding the biochemical component helps explain why willpower alone isn't sufficient to change these patterns. The addiction to emotional intensity operates at a biological level that requires conscious recognition and deliberate management rather than simple behavioral modification. If you're recognizing these patterns in your own relationships, if this analysis is explaining conflicts that previous lies, irrational, or random, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your engagement helps censure that. These conversations caution that men start understanding psychological forces that drive male behavior. Modern culture actively encourages, while men view emotional expression and conflict creation as signs of authenticity and empowerment. Women are taught that suppressing their emotions is unhealthy and that expressing their feelings, regardless of context, is psychologically necessary. Social programming tells women that men don't respond emotionally to their concerns, are emotionally unavailable or toxic. This creates cultural pressure for women to escalate conflicts until they generate the emotional responses that society tells them healthy men's provide. The programming also frames male preferences for peace and stability as emotional immaturity or avoidance rather than different but valid approaches to relationship management. Women learn to view your desire for calm as a problem to be corrected rather than a preference to be respected. Media representations consistently portray passionate, conflict-filled relationships as more authentic and meaningful than peaceful, stable partnerships. Women internalize messages that drama equals passion and that relationships without regular conflict are emotionally shallow. Social programming creates cultural support for conflict-seeking behaviors, while pathizing male preferences for emotional stability. Women receive reinforcement, friends, family, and media for standing up for themselves. Through emotional confrontation, this cultural context makes it difficult for women to recognize their own conflict-seeking patterns because a society frames these behaviors as healthy emotional expression rather than potentially destructive relationship orders. Understanding why women choose conflict provides the foundation for developing effective strategies to manage these dynamics without surrendering your psychological safety or enabling destructive patterns. The first principle is fusing to reward conflict behavior with the emotional reactions that feed the addiction. When you remain calm and detached during her provocations, you're innate providing the biochemical rewards that reinforce conflict-seeking patterns. The second principle, establishing clear boundaries around acceptable conflict behavior while providing alternative pathways for emotional connection. You can acknowledge her need for emotional intensity while refusing to participate in destructive drama. The third principle is recognizing that you cannot eliminate her need for emotional submission, but you can influence how that need gets satisfied. Providing positive emotional intensity through adventure, challenge, and passion reduces her need to create negative intensity through conflict. The fourth principle is understanding that some women are too addicted to conflict to function in peaceful relationships. The woman who cannot tolerate emotional stability or who requires constant drama feel engaged is not psychological alchemy with healthy relationship needs. The ultimate solution requires developing such complete emotional severity that her conflicts cannot disturb your psychological equilibrium. When you truly don't need her emotional validation or approval, her dramatic behaviors lose their power to manipulate responses. Women's tendency toward conflict creation isn't a character flaw or relationship defect. It's evolutionary programming that served important. Survival functions through the Totheman history. Understanding this biological foundation helps you respond strategically rather than taking these behaviors personally. Throughout evolutionary history, women could successfully maintain malattention and emotional investment through various means, including conflict, were more likely to receive protection, resources, and complementarity for survival and reproduction. The women who allowed men to become emotionally detached or distracted risked abandonment during vulnerable periods like pregnancy and childbearing. Conflict served as a mechanism testing and maintaining mal-emotional investment in the relationship. Modern women retain this biological programming even though the survival context no longer exists. The behaviors that once served crucial survival functions now operate as relationship management strategies that often create more problems than they solve. Understanding the evolutionary pures helps you recognize that her conflict behaviors aren't directed at you personally. There are unconscious strategies for managing relationship security that operate below. Conscious awareness. This perspective allows you to respond to conflict patterns with strategist intelligence rather than emotional reactivity. You can address thunderling insecurity driving the behavior while refusing to participate in destructive drama. The ultimate truth about women's choice to fight is that it rivals fundamental incompatibility male and female approaches to emotional regulation and relationship maintenance. Recognizing these differences allows you to make conscious choices about how to respond. You can choose to participate in conflict cycles that drain your energy and compromise your psychological being. You can enable destructive patterns by providing the emotional reactions that reinforce conflict-seeking behaviors. Or you can choose to develop the emotional severity that allows you to remain centered regardless of her emotional states. You can refuse to participate in drama while still providing the genuine emotional connection that satisfies her psychological needs. The choice requires understanding that you cannot change her biological programming, but you can control your responses to it. You cannot eliminate her need for emotional intensity, but you can influence how that need gets expressed in your relationship. Some women can learn to satisfy their emotional needs through positive intensity rather than conflict drama. Others remain addicted to negative emotional stimulation and cannot function in peaceful relationships. The wise man learns to distinguish between women who can evolve beyond conflict addiction and those who cannot. He develops the strength to walk away from relationships that require him to sacrifice his psychological being to maintain artificial peace. Your mental health is not negotiable. Your emotional sovereignty is not for Sally. Your psychological stability is not a reasonable sacrifice for relationship maintenance. Choose wisely. Your sanity depends on it.